Captain Midnight.
So before I decided to review this movie for a video after you guys had voted on it, I hadn't seen Ang Lee's Hulk since I was 10 in the summer of 2003. I remember thinking it was kind of boring until the last half hour where the Hulk shows up and then thinking it was pretty awesome. My dad though, who had taken me, definitely disagreed. I remember him saying something like, that was the worst movie I've seen in theaters in a long time. And a lot of people across the country must have thought the same thing, because the next weekend, Hulk suffered a whopping 70% drop at the box office, which was kind of unheard of back then. But since then, a new reputation has kind of grown around the movie, with some articles being written saying that it's one of the smartest and most misunderstood comic book films ever made. So when I sat down to watch it, I wasn't sure what Hulk I was going to get. The disappointing bore that many in 2003 felt it was, or a daring and cerebral masterpiece. Well, let's get into it.
I've got the power of the Hulk in my hands, and I like it!
Ang Lee's Hulk is not a good movie. That bums me out to say a little bit because I was really hoping that I'd revisit it and find a gem, but no matter how much I think about it, there's just not much about this film that I enjoy. I will say though, Ang Lee is obviously a pretty fantastic director visually, and there's some shots in this that really benefit from that. But before I go and praise his direction too much, there is one aspect of this movie that just sticks out like a gamma-radiated thumb: the scene transitions and split screens. I'm assuming these were meant to mirror the feeling of reading a comic book, and maybe there's a cool idea buried somewhere in there, but this is not it. The split screen I can handle. It actually kind of reminded me of 24, which premiered just a few years before this movie was released. The transitions themselves though are a huge problem. They're constant. Like, it's hard to go for more than a few minutes without seeing one, and they draw a ton of attention to themselves. Pacing a film is really hard, even under the best of circumstances, but forcing each scene transition to zoom around the screen and basically announce, hey, we're switching scenes, doesn't make the movie feel exciting. It just makes it feel sluggish. And that's not helped by the fact that for the first 40 minutes or so, we're mostly transitioning between scenes of people sitting around in labs or in living rooms, having conversations that aren't exactly crackling with Stan Lee excitement. I always hesitate to call a movie boring, because I think that's a pretty lazy term to use when criticizing a piece of art, but there's just really no better way to put it here. Hulk is boring. At times painfully so. And that's not because I'm against movies with lots of conversations and dialogue. I mean, one of my favorite films of all time is Network, and that's almost nothing but people in offices arguing. But this dialogue is just so painfully dull. I think a big part of it is our lead, Bruce Banner himself. Eric Bana is a good actor usually, at times even a great one, so the only conclusion I can come to from his performance here is that Ang Lee asked him to play it understated, like really understated. So understated that he could almost get upstaged by an extra in any given scene. Like, what's this guy up to? No idea, but it's probably more interesting than whatever Bruce Banner is doing.
Incredible Hulk radio-controlled inflatable figure. With a radio transmitter, you can give him commands. 2 9-volt and 4C batteries and
The story centers around him and even tries to make Bruce's origin more dramatic, making it so that he saw his mother stabbed to death when he was a kid. Jennifer Connelly's Betty Ross is in love with him, Thunderbolt Ross hates him. So who is this man that inspires so much passion in people and has such a tragic past? Well, he's just kind of this guy who mumbles a lot and usually looks mildly constipated. I don't think you can fully appreciate how good Mark Ruffalo is as Banner until you go back and look at this totally sullen, uninteresting version of him here. In what's probably my favorite scene of the movie, Bruce's dad, who I guess is named David in like a nod to the 80s series where that was Banner's name instead of Bruce, screams at him, saying that he considers the Hulk his real son and Bruce nothing more than a shell or container that holds him. And you know what? As ridiculous as it sounds, when you watch Eric Bana, you can kind of see where he's coming from. This guy isn't a movie lead, he's the shell of a movie lead. So let's shove him aside and talk about the Hulk and Nick Nolte's villain. And this is where the movie goes from kind of a downbeat, dull action movie to the strange beast that it really is. Nick Nolte, who in 2003 had completed his transformation from leading man to gruff, angry hobo, gives a good performance here. I like him quite a bit in this movie actually, but the character is just so weird. At no point are his goals understandable. Apparently in this version, Bruce Banner isn't given his powers in a gamma blast, but in a lab experiment, kind of like the 80s show. But also, he kind of already has them because his dad has been experimenting with it already. And now David Banner is obsessed with bringing the Hulk part out of Bruce and even becoming one himself. He also has these 3 little dogs who he injects with his son's DNA, resulting in one of the strangest fight scenes in a big budget action movie I've seen in a while. These Hulk dogs were apparently designed by Ang Lee's elementary school age son, and okay? I guess they wanted to give Hulk something to do before the 3rd act, like the poor guy gets no screen time for the first 40 minutes. But this was just such a bizarre way to do it. I'm just imagining Nick Nolte piling these giant monster dogs into a van and taking them to Betty's house to attack her. Like, did that happen? How does he control them? Why does he have these 3 little dogs following him around literally everywhere he goes? Who thought this was a good idea? Then there's the big climax with the scene that I mentioned earlier, in which Nick Nolte bites into a live wire in an attempt to get superpowers. He has the special Bruce DNA in him and he just needs some electricity, I guess? I guess his body is kind of like a 98 Honda Civic and just needs a jump start to get going. I'm all for suspension of disbelief, and usually I'm not one to nitpick, but this is just kind of a bridge too far. So anyway, after he becomes a big electricity monster, it gets even crazier as he absorbs the Hulk's powers and becomes a big ball of energy or something. And look, I understand that Ang Lee was trying to explore this toxic father-son relationship in metaphorical terms, but Lee, your movie ends with Nick Nolte becoming a giant angry energy bubble. Come on, man.
Dark Bruce Banner, melted by gamma rays, turned into the Hulk.
E.T. and Glamour Ray.
I'll say this though, the scenes of the Hulk leaping around the desert in San Francisco have aged surprisingly well. Sure, this Hulk doesn't measure up to the current one, but it doesn't look terrible either. And the action scenes, especially the one where a fighter pilot tries to take the Hulk as far into the sky as possible, are pretty solid. It really shows Ang Lee's skill at directing action at its best. In the end, much like the subject of its plot I guess, Ang Lee's Hulk was an experiment that went wrong. He wanted to do something unique, and I think that's to be applauded. But in doing so, he completely left the passion that powered the best of the original Jack Kirby and Stan Lee run out, leaving us with a protagonist so boring he had me cheering for Thunderbolt Ross. So what we're left with definitely isn't a masterpiece, but there's enough interesting stuff here that I'm not sure I'd call it a disaster either. Now it's just kind of a strange footnote in comic book movie history. A dead end that was never really followed up on. The Hulk may still be around, and in my opinion better than ever, but Ang Lee's Hulk feels almost forgotten. I look at some of the best scenes in this movie and I think maybe that's too bad. And then the Hulk dogs show up and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe some experiments are better left alone. Well guys, that was my Patreon exclusive for April. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to know, what do you think of this Hulk movie? Love it? Hate it? How do you feel? Oh, and let me know what you'd like to see in June. Until then, thanks for being a Patreon donor, and I will see you again Thursday.